So far, we've created data flows from the admin perspective. After creating a data flow, you can choose to share it with others. You can commission access to a data flow by selecting if you want someone's role to be an administrator, a member, a contributor, or a viewer. You can commission someone access to, or remove it from one of the data flows, but not necessarily the others. Setting up these roles allows for multiple users to access the queries in the data flow without sacrificing security, thus making it a scalable solution. You can see on the screen the capabilities for each of these roles in a Power BI data flow. Based on what they're trying to do that you see in this list, you can decide how you want to commission their access. In our Power BI Cloud account, to update the admin roles, you select the Access button, where you're going to give someone access to this specific workspace in the data flows. You can enter their email address at the top, and decide which one of the roles you want them to have. You see that there's one admin currently for this workspace, and you can change what type of permission they have. When you add someone to the list, they will receive the email and learn more about the user role that they have in Power BI. Scheduling data refreshing. In the Power BI Cloud, we set up our refreshing schedule by going to the Microsoft Stock Price Dataflows in the Dataflow list. We then select the tablet icon that allows us to schedule the data refresh. We need to refresh all the queries in the data flow at the same time, rather than individually. If we go into our stock price data flow, notice that the option to schedule a refresh is not one of the actions. Incremental refresh is a separate functionality that we will discuss a little later. To schedule the updates for the Microsoft stock price data, select the Schedule Refresh button. This takes us through to a new screen, where we first ensure that the gateway is properly set up for this data connection. You should already have this set up from when you created the data flow, but you do want to confirm that it's working, and check the data source credentials. And then we expand the menu for the scheduled refresh options. We turn on the radio button. We're going to refresh this daily. We're going to choose East Coast time in the US, and because the stock market closes in the early evening, we're going to select the time that is after that time period. Let's say 9 p.m. Select the checkmark to make sure that you receive failure notifications if your dataflow does not update. With Power BI Pro accounts, you can update the data multiple times a day. In the Power BI Premium accounts, you can update them far more often than the Pro accounts. The question is, how often do we want to update the stock price data? If we're looking at daily stock price numbers, we really only need to update the data flow once a day, so we can add another time, but we're not going to do that for this particular case. We hit Apply to properly schedule our refresh. Now we navigate back to our data flow again, and this time, we're going to go into the data flow to take a look at that incremental refresh option. We open up the incremental refresh, and we can turn it on. This time we're going to choose the date field. We want to store all the rows from the past, but we also only want to refresh rows from the past day, because this reflects the most recent day of stock prices. Historical stock prices are not going to change going backward, so we really only need to refresh the new stock price data for a particular day. And that will be when we'll be refreshing the data anyways. And we select Save. We're going to use 100 years, just to make sure we have all the historical data points, and select Save, and now we see that this is actually an option that's only available for Premium. Even though we didn't receive the message for it when we set it up, so this is something that if your organization is dealing with a lot of active data like this. This is an option to leverage to make sure you're not continually running the same processes to get the same data every day, even though it's going to be the same. And the warning message was for the incremental refresh, so we know that it's there, so I'm just going to check the dataset now. Because we need to schedule the data refresh for the stock price data. These datasets will not update automatically because the Dataflow is refreshed itself. We're going to update the stock price, version 1. We just schedule the refresh in the same way that we did for the Dataflow, and because we've already set up the gateway for this dataset, we don't need to refresh the gateway again. Because it pulls the data from the Dataflow. We schedule the refresh, turn it on. This time, again, we select the US Eastern Time, and we're going to schedule the refresh for 10 p.m., which is an hour after we refresh the data in the Dataflow. We then hit Apply to save our refresh schedule. There we have it, how to set up a refresh schedule in the cloud to make sure that you're running on the most recent data for both your dataflows and the datasets that go into them. Representing dataflow structures with JSON files. JSON, or JavaScript Object Notation, files stored data in a structured format that machines, like computers, can easily read. In the context of Power BI Dataflows, you can share or transfer your dataflows and the queries within them by exporting the dataflow as a JSON file, which is a native functionality available for the dataflows. You can then import this JSON file to create a new dataflow. Let's say you want to transfer the testing tables dataflow into a new workspace within your Power BI account. We don't need to recreate the same process again in the new workspace for the 5 queries within this dataflow. We can instead choose to share the dataflow by exporting the JSON file. This JSON file models all the queries within the dataflow. Next to the testing tables dataflow, in the Actions list, choose the ellipsis menu, then select Export JSON. We receive a message that the file downloads. Now, let's create a new workspace in our Power BI account. Going to create a new workspace called Transferring Dataflow, and select Save. Now, we can create a new dataflow by choosing the Dataflow tile, and selecting Getting Started. In the view to start a new dataflow, instead of defining new query entities, we're going to select to import a model. We want to select the testing tables JSON file we just downloaded from the other workspace. We select Open, and it imports the dataflow model. We see the file imports, but we also may need to update the credentials such as the API connections. To do that, you would go back into the gateway, but let's see if the dataflow properly uploaded. And we see a new dataflow in our workspace called Testing Tables. We open to take a look into it. We see it contains the 5 queries in the other workspace. So there we have it. This is an example of how to efficiently transfer your work, such as queries, that go into the dataflow without having to replicate all the work on your own. That is the end of this course. Thanks for joining me to create Power BI Dataflow queries. Try out some examples of data connections in your own organization that would benefit from utilizing data flows, whether that's from a database, Salesforce report, or an API query. Think about how to scale this data to consolidate ETL processes and remove unnecessary duplicated work. Stay tuned for Microsoft updates, as they're moving fast in accessing cloud data like this. Feel free to connect with me on YouTube, or follow my posts on my YouTube channel teaching style Power BI and data analytics and visualization. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to my channel. For more videos, follow my posts on my YouTube channel teaching style.